Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, thank you so much for being here at the Reagan Library for the Reagan National Economic Forum. Appreciate you being here.
Honor to be in the presence of Ronald Reagan's legacy.
Well, we're excited, and there's much to discuss. So the mission of this Reagan National Economic Forum is to advance policies that will strengthen American innovation, growth, and opportunity in the face of fierce global competition and challenges to our nation's security and challenges at home as well. And now you've warned that top-down mandates in energy policy reduce prosperity, they reduce freedom and national security. So what does a truly free market energy policy look like? And what are the consequences if we continue down the opposite path?
Yeah, if you get the government out of the way and give simple permits to be able to move energy sources around, import them and export them out of our country, you just get a lot more energy. And if you have a lot more energy in your country, you have lower energy prices, life's more affordable for the citizens in your country, and critically, businesses that make things. The biggest use of global energy is manufacturing. You make things in our country again. You bring back those rural, blue-collar jobs that our country desperately needs today. So that Reagan approach of freedom brings prosperity and opportunity to Americans. The last 4 years of top-down control just sends those jobs abroad and gets everyone very upset about paying more than they should for energy.
Well, days ago, President Trump signed not one, not two, not three, but 4 executive orders to, as what the White House said, usher in a new nuclear renaissance. What is the Department of Energy doing to implement these orders, and what are the challenges and opportunities that you see going forward?
The nuclear age was ushered in, an incredible effort during the Manhattan Project to develop a bomb quickly to win World War II and to secure our dominant position in the Cold War. After that, in 3 decades, 4 decades top, we built over 100 nuclear power plants in this country. And then we created a new government agency, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Since its creation, we've built about 3 nuclear power plants. We let government and bureaucracy get in the way, and we basically stifled the nuclear industry. We want to get it going again. But if you've had an industry that hasn't done hardly anything in 3 or 4 decades, that's hard to do. So President Trump is all in on this. So he's trying to streamline the regulatory the regulatory framework so that stifling bureaucracy can be pulled back a little bit. He's trying to use assets like our national labs where we have land and we have technology and we have reactor containment vehicles so that we can do testing. We can help private companies bring their designs along. And then we're going to do some creative financing driven by private capital and private equity. But we're going to give those nudges to get this nuclear ball rolling again. But that nuclear renaissance has been talked about for 5 or 10 years. President Trump, under this term, that ball's going to be rolling. There'll be more than a dozen reactors under construction while President Trump is in office.
Which countries do you view as leading the world right now in nuclear?
Well, sadly, 85% of the reactors that have been built in the last 20 years are Chinese or Russian. They've gone ahead. They are leading in developing nuclear and building plants, not just in their own countries, but abroad. That's just wrong. Your nuclear partnership with a country, we want those countries outside of our country to use American technology and be American partners. We want to build them in our country and our technology abroad.
In your remarks last month at the 3Cs Business Forum in Warsaw, Poland, you quoted President Reagan calling this moment a time for choosing, which of course is the very famous name of a speech that he gave that broke him out into the political scene in 1964. So what did you mean by invoking that time for choosing language, and how should the U.S. respond at this inflection point in global energy policy?
The time for choosing, we're using those beautiful Reagan words to the Central European nations, was they joined the EU because they wanted access to that market. They wanted to fully break away from Russia and the remnants of the Soviet Union. But they paid a massive price for that. All of them had to agree to a time frame to shut down their coal plants. That was their dominant source of electricity. And then invest in the fashionable but unreliable and expensive electricity sources. These are not as high income countries as Germany or France or whatever. They were under the Soviet yoke for decades. They need to, in my mind, they don't need to finish closing all their coal plants. They could push back and push forward to energy freedom. I think they might bring the rest of Europe along with them. But and I think there was a lot of resonance about that. The Polish president was quite fired up about that idea that maybe the trajectory they're on is not the right one. I think they should stand up for energy freedom and prosperity. And of course, that's The United States has gone that way, but we've had the last 4 years, everything possible to move us onto this European top-down expensive energy. We don't want more energy, we want less energy. That's just not the way to freedom and prosperity and opportunity.
With energy demand from AI and data centers surging, you've called artificial intelligence the Manhattan Project of our time and a critical front in the competition with China. So how is the Department of Energy working with the private sector to meet this demand and ensure that the U.S. leads in both infrastructure and strategic capabilities such as AI?
Yeah, so in the first Manhattan Project, there were no private partners, right? This was government labs and scientists from around the world. In this one, AI, the dominant capital and dominant innovation is coming from our private sector, which is fantastic. Hundreds of billions of dollars will be invested just during President Trump's term. But if we don't have a regulatory framework conducive to being able to build the energy here in the United States to power these data centers, they won't be built here. They'll be built where the energy is. And like with the Manhattan Project, getting second is just not an option. If Nazi Germany had developed an atomic bomb before the United States, what would our world be like? And AI is like that. We think
the
of
SEALs call being number two being the first loser, right? We don't want that.
Exactly. If China is way ahead of us in artificial intelligence, not just bad economically, it's bad for our national security. It's a risk to our sovereignty.
Given your background in the private sector and now your leadership role in the U.S. government, is there an important energy or business issue that you're aware of that isn't getting the attention it deserves?
Energy is just wildly misunderstood for most people. You know, people think of just energy production. It's not just about production. It's about infrastructure and transportation. Why does every state in New England have expensive energy and no one wants to build any manufacturing there? Well, there's awesome energy resources in Pennsylvania and in fact under New York as well, but you need a pipeline to bring that energy source to where people live. So you need to be able to build infrastructure to have cheap energy all across your country. We shouldn't have cheap energy just in some states. We should have cheap energy available for all Americans.
Well, as a lifelong entrepreneur who came of age during the Reagan era and as a staunch advocate of free market innovation and economic freedom, what does Ronald Reagan mean to you?
Oh, Ronald Reagan's only the embodiment of the ideas of freedom, but he's the one that was so powerful in the way he communicated it. He took a world that was sliding, towards larger and larger government, which means more pessimism. He took a dark, pessimistic America that thought its best days were behind us, and he reinvigorated the belief in freedom and entrepreneurship and self-authorship. He brought an optimism and a dynamism back to our country that transformed my life.
Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, thank you so much for joining us here at the Reagan Library and the Reagan National Economic Forum.
Thanks for having me. Honored to be here.